65% of ordinary people pushed the final switch, the one marked danger. Before the study, the experts guessed 1 in 1,000. Same people. Same room. Nobody could explain the gap. His name is Stanley Milgram. He is a young psychologist at Yale, and the year is 1961. He has not built a torture chamber. He has built a very ordinary room with a very ordinary machine and filled it with very ordinary people. Volunteers who answered a newspaper ad, teachers, salesmen, engineers, postal workers, people who, that same morning, kissed someone goodbye and drove to New Haven to earn $4.50 for helping with a study on memory. That is what they were told they were there for. Memory and learning. A simple experiment. One of them would be the teacher. One of them would be the learner. The learner would try to memorize word pairs, and every time he got one wrong, the teacher would give him an electric shock. A little more each time. But the study was never about memory. You were the experiment. Your obedience was the thing being measured. And nobody, not the volunteers, not the experts Milgram asked beforehand, guessed what the machine would find. Here is the setup, exactly as it happened. You arrive. Another volunteer arrives at the same time, a mild, pleasant man in his late 40s. The two of you draw slips of paper to decide who teaches and who learns. You get teacher? It feels like luck. It was not. The other man was an actor, and the draw was rigged so that you always ended up in the teacher's chair. He is walked into the next room, and you watch as electrodes are taped to his arm. He mentions, almost in passing, that he has a slight heart condition. The experimenter says the shocks are painful but not dangerous. Then the door closes. You sit at the machine, 30 switches in a neat row. The lowest is 15 volts, the highest is 450. You read a word. The learner picks an answer. When he is wrong, you push a switch. And every wrong answer moves you one switch further down the row. At first it is nothing. A buzz. The learner barely reacts. But the machine climbs. At 75 volts he grunts. At 120 he shouts that it really hurts. At 150 he says he wants out, that his heart is bothering him, that he refuses to go on. And this is the moment. This is where you would stop. Everyone says they would stop here. You are sure you would stop here. You turn to the man in the gray coat. You tell him the learner wants to quit, and he does not raise his voice. He does not threaten you. He simply says 4 things, always in the same order, always calm. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice, you must go on. That is the entire arsenal. No weapon, no punishment. 4 flat sentences from a man with a clipboard. Before he ran this, Milgram walked the design past a room full of psychiatrists and asked them to predict the results. How many people, they thought, would go all the way to the final switch? The one past danger. Their answer was almost none. Maybe 1 in 1,000. Only someone genuinely disturbed, they said a rare sadist, would push a stranger to 450 volts on command. That was the expert consensus. The real number was 65%. Nearly 2 out of every 3 ordinary people pushed every switch to the end. Past the shouting. Past the pounding on the wall. Past the point where, in some versions, the learner stopped responding at all and simply went silent, which is somehow worse. They did not do it happily. This is the part people forget. They sweated. They stuttered. They laughed in that awful, nervous way people laugh when something is very wrong. They begged the experimenter to check on the man. They said out loud that they did not want to keep going. And then they kept going. Why? That is the question that turned one small experiment into one of the most cited findings in the history of psychology. And the answer is not that these people were monsters. If they were monsters, you would be safe. The answer is far less comfortable, and it lives inside you too. Milgram's own explanation was that people slip into what he called the agentic state. When you accept that someone else is in charge, something quiet happens in your mind. You stop seeing yourself as the author of your actions. You become the instrument. The hand that pushes the switch belongs to you, but the decision, you feel, belongs to the man in the coat. And so the moral weight, the thing that should stop you, gets handed upward. Not my responsibility, he said. Continue. He is the one who knows. Watch how small the trigger is. It is not fear. Nobody in that room was afraid of Stanley Milgram or of a graduate student with a clipboard. There were no guns, no threats, no consequences for walking out. The volunteers were free to leave the entire time and keep the money. What held them was something much older and much cheaper. A voice that sounded certain. A coat that looked official. A setting, Yale, that felt legitimate. The costume of authority, not the substance of it. And Milgram proved it was the costume. He ran the experiment again and again, changing one thing at a time, and the obedience rose and fell like a dial. When he moved the study out of Yale into a rundown office building with a made-up company name, obedience dropped. When the experimenter gave his orders by telephone instead of in the room, obedience collapsed. When another teacher, actually a second actor, refused and walked out first, most real volunteers followed him out. The authority was never in the man. It was in the room's belief that he had authority. Take away the props, and the spell weakened. Now pull back to the beginning, the switches. The labels climbing toward danger. The quiet man behind you saying, please continue. You have spent this whole story certain you are the volunteer who would stand up. Almost everyone is certain of that. That certainty is the most dangerous part, because the people who walked all the way to 450 volts were just as certain, that same morning, that they never could. You obey a man in a white coat, because your ancestors survived by trusting the ones who seemed to be in charge. The tribe that questioned every command in the middle of a crisis did not outlive the tribe that moved together. Deference is old wiring. It kept you alive for a very long time, and it does not switch off just because the man giving the order is wrong. Your brain is not asking whether the command is right. It is asking whether the person giving it looks like they are allowed to give it. That wiring does not stay in a Yale basement. It is in the employee who signs off on the number he knows is fake because a senior name is on the email. It is in the crowd that keeps moving toward the exit that is clearly wrong because everyone in front is moving. It is in every uniform, every title, every confident voice that says continue while some smaller part of you is quietly saying stop. Milgram did not discover a flaw in a few strange people in New Haven. He discovered the setting on the dial, and the dial is standard equipment. So here is the uncomfortable inheritance. The switches are still in front of you. The labels still climb. And somewhere behind you, in almost every part of your life, there is a calm voice that sounds like it knows more than you do, telling you that the experiment requires you to continue. The only real question Milgram left you with is not whether that voice exists. It is whether you will notice, in the moment it matters, that you always did have another choice.